Okay, all you DOT people, you got to sit down back there. That means you, Matt Linneman. Okay, we're going to get started. Some people are coming in still. That's good. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Bill Panos, and I am the director of the North Dakota Department of Transportation. We have a great panel today, and so I'm very much looking forward to all of our speakers. We have Josh Fisher from the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We have, okay, if I pronounce any of these names incorrectly, I'm asking for forgiveness. Brian Harinka from Minot City Transit. How did I do, Brian? Okay, good. Josh Schaffner from Capital Electric. Did I do okay? Good. Steve Solway from our own NDDOT. Yay, Steve. Justin Kristen from the North Dakota Active Transportation Alliance. And your hair looks good, Justin, by the way. And Kate Herzog from Bismarck Downtowners.
How's my hair look?
Your hair looks great. Okay, her hair looks great. So welcome everybody to this panel. You know, we spend a great deal of time talking about smart and efficient infrastructure in the NDDOT, and the future of transportation is very exciting, as many of you know, innovative and high tech, and it pays North Dakota communities to start thinking about what this might mean for all of our communities around the state down the road. So we have a great panel here to talk about innovative things happening across North Dakota. Several speakers on the panel this morning. I don't want to waste, we have several speakers to talk today, so I don't want to waste a single second. So I'm going to ask the panelists should just go up one right after another, and then hopefully we'll have time for a little Q&A at the end, okay? So settle in, and if you have questions, we'll get to them at the very end. So first up, we're just going to get started here. First up, please help me welcome to the state of North Dakota for his first visit, Josh Fisher from the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Josh?
Thank you, Director Panos, and it's great to be here today. Again, I'm Josh Fisher. I'm the Director of State Affairs for the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. I guess the screens, there we go, okay. We are a DC-based trade association, and we represent the leading auto manufacturers in the U.S. We also represent several Tier 1 suppliers and AV tech startup companies. So we really come with a whole of industry approach to policy at the state and federal level. So there you go again. We represent the manufacturers that produce 99% of all the light-duty cars and trucks sold in the U.S. And here's a picture with all of our members here, all the names you know and love, and maybe some of you are not familiar with, but you will get to know over the years. You know, Cruise and Argo are very active in AV technology, and we're very happy that they're part of our association. So today, I want to talk about a few things. I want to start by going over where we are policy-wise at the state and federal level when it comes to AV technology. Then I want to talk about our industry's vision for future mobility. And then finally, how do we actually get there? So first, we're really at a critical time in the development of AV technology. Our companies have invested billions of dollars into research and development of AV technology, and these investments are starting to pay off. We're seeing multiple demonstrations and pilot programs around the country showing proof that the technology does work. But we're also at a critical time because the policy has to be right. You can make an argument right now, even if you had level 5 full self-driving technology available to the public, that the policy really would not support wide-scale deployment in the US. And that's a problem, because when the technology is ready, we need the policy to be in place. So we really need to start thinking about where we need to be and how are we going to get there. So right now, I think I skipped ahead one. At Congress, we're nowhere. A handful of years ago, there was really momentum for bipartisan AV legislation, and unfortunately, as it often does in Congress, that momentum has evaporated. So we're kind of back to square one. We're working hard with our allies in Congress to get something done, but we've got a long way ahead of us. Now at the agency level, not surprisingly, when you get a change in administrations, you get a reshifting of priorities and a change of focus, and we're still waiting for some clarity from the Biden administration about what tack they're going to take when it comes to AV policy. But it's really critical that they get in the game because the standards need to be set. And we'll talk about more later on why that is so important, that the US be the country to set the standards of this technology in the future. Now at the state level, which might be a little more applicable for folks in the room, as you would expect with 50 different state governments, it's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to AV policy. We've got a lot of good and we've got some bad out there. But for North Dakota, it's important to know that you're at the top tier of states when it comes to supportive AV policies. We did conduct a 50-state assessment of state AV laws to get a better understanding of what the landscape looks like, and North Dakota ranked in the top tier of states. It's also important to know that several of your neighboring states also rank that high, which is good, because you've got to start to think regionally when we start thinking about AV technology, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But some of the key takeaways, a flexible policy environment is really key. North Dakota has maintained this sort of environment. You don't want to set this, put in the statute or regs right now requirements that are going to be outdated or outmoded in 6 months because the technology has changed. You really want to be flexible and keep an open mind policy-wise as we move forward here. So just briefly, some do's and don'ts. North Dakota has done a lot right. Like I said, flexible policy environment. I think it would be important for the state to identify a lead, either agency or contact, that would be the coordinator for all AV activity in the state. That way, industry would know who they need to go speak to in North Dakota. There's one point of contact. We don't want to have to go to 3 different agencies to try and get approval for something. I think having a coordinator is really key. And just some don'ts as you move forward. Don't get into vehicle design. We've seen some states do that, and that's really problematic for us. We want to sell one vehicle for the US market. We don't want to sell 50 different vehicles for 50 different markets in the US. So we want to make sure that the traditional roles of the federal and state governments are maintained as this technology comes to the market, and I'll talk about that a little bit more moving forward here. So what is our vision for future mobility, our industry's vision for future mobility? Well, the US has historically exhibited leadership in cutting-edge investments when it comes to advanced technology that will help transform how we live and work. And the goal of AV technology is to help reduce and prevent the 94% of vehicle crashes that are attributable to us, the human driver. And moreover, AVs have the potential to help expand mobility access. Folks who might be getting on in years or have physical disabilities have lost their freedom of mobility, and AV technology really does hold that promise to give them back that freedom. So if you had to boil down the vision as we see it, it's a cleaner, safer, smarter transportation future. You heard the governor earlier talk about reducing carbon intensity, going carbon neutral. That's really important. Our industry is also investing heavily in electrification. That's the cleaner part of this. The safer part is ensuring that AV technology, when it's ready, can be deployed into the marketplace so folks can take advantage of the technology in their vehicles. We're seeing the data already that supports that the foundational technologies, your automatic emergency braking, lane keep assist, that is already saving lives and reducing crashes, which is really key. And that, like I said, technology is going to be foundational to the higher levels of automation, your level 4 and your level 5. And it's also smarter, our vision, right? That's about connected technology, vehicles talking to each other, vehicles talking to infrastructure, letting you know what's ahead, around the bend that you can't see. So again, it's cleaner, safer, smarter. And that all sounds well and good, but it's really how do we get there? And that's going to be the challenge. So when can we expect to see wide-scale AV deployment? That's the question everybody always wants to know. And there's no simple answer to that, but there are really two points that you should keep in mind that are going to impact the timeline. One, of course, when the technology is ready. The technology needs to be tested and make sure it works, and the standards need to be set at the federal level. That all needs to take place, but the policy also needs to be in place. Like I said a couple minutes ago, even if the technology were ready now, there's really considerable questions about if it could be deployed wide scale across the US. And so we want to make sure that when we are ready, the policy environment supports wide scale deployment. And so to do that, our association, Auto Innovators, we created an AV roadmap. So the AV roadmap is a way to clearly outline a pathway to this cleaner, safer, smarter transportation future. So it's a comprehensive, multifaceted roadmap to guide leadership of a national strategy to advance AV technology. That includes the federal and state governments. The roadmap represents a playbook for policymakers on actions they can take over the next 4 years to facilitate and foster deployment of AV technology. So our member companies and others that are developing these exciting AV technologies are feeling a great sense of urgency about getting the policy environment right. So it's our hope with the AV roadmap, which contains specific policy recommendations, it's going to help guide policymakers to prioritize policy development over the next few years and get us where we need to be to realize the safety and mobility benefits that are going to be so consequential to millions of Americans. One example of a recommendation in the roadmap is to clarify the federal versus state roles. Like I mentioned, the federal government is the entity that is responsible for the design, construction, and performance of vehicles. But we've seen some states like California start to dip their toes in the water, mandate certain aspects of vehicle design, and that's just going to be a massive headache, and that's one of those, what we call policy barriers to eventual deployment. So it's always important to keep that in mind as you consider what policies you might want to consider when moving forward. So talking about potential policy barriers, anything that's in your statutes or regulations right now that only contemplates a human driver, language that says the driver shall, right? That was written at a time where we just thought humans were always going to drive. So as you consider policies, always keep that in mind. North Dakota has taken some actions, and they've been in line with supporting AV technology, but it's always important to keep that in mind as we move forward here. Are there any existing barriers that need to be addressed as we move forward? Infrastructure. One of the themes of this conference is smart infrastructure. And the good news is that a lot of the infrastructure needs of automated vehicles are also the infrastructure needs of non-automated vehicles. And in that sense, it's going to be much more cost-effective to invest in traditional infrastructure right now, which will eventually support AV deployment in the future. And if Congress can get its act together and pass the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, that's really going to be significant for every state in the U.S. because we've had trouble maintaining infrastructure, let alone getting ahead and investing in more infrastructure. So examples up here of what could support AV technology in the future, but is also beneficial to existing vehicles on the road. Clear lane markings. It's something so simple, but it's really important because the vehicles are going to rely on an array of sensors to maintain their position on the road, or rely on detailed maps, cameras, radar, LiDAR, and being able to see the lane markings is going to be critical. Something so simple, but so important to the technology. And you can see some other examples up there of things to keep in mind as you move forward and make considerations about investing in infrastructure. There's a lot of talk about connected vehicles, and with the FCC's ruling that took some of the, what we call the safety spectrum away from vehicles and moved it over to Wi-Fi, that's kind of complicated our future for connected vehicles. And so a lot of states have some pilot projects around connected vehicles, but right now it's a little tough to say where that money needs to go for the future. So right now, really invest in what the core infrastructure, because that is going to support AV technology in the future. Another area recommendation in the AV roadmap is harmonizing state traffic laws. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of your neighboring states and North Dakota have pretty good policy environments right now for AV technology, and you need to start thinking regionally. Vehicles don't stop at state lines. But the laws change once you cross the state line. You've got variations in how far a vehicle has to stop behind a school bus. It could be 20 feet in North Dakota, it could be 50 feet in South Dakota. Now, of course, we can program the software to accommodate for that, but it would be a whole lot easier if traffic laws were harmonized across the country as best as possible to make sure that we don't have to do that, right? If we have a national set or regional set of harmonized traffic laws, that will go a long way to smoothing the way for AV technology deployment as we move forward. Testing across state lines is really going to be important as we move forward here. So I would really encourage North Dakota and your neighboring states to keep that in mind. Potential partnerships with the industry. when it comes to reviewing statutes, regulations, of course, we want to be a resource to provide input when that comes up. We've worked with the legislature in the past to do that, and we've always found a willing partner in that body and the agency level and the governor's office. So we're really happy that the folks in North Dakota have an open mind about the best way to move this technology forward, and we always want to keep that relationship going. Another potential opportunity, pilot demonstrations, pilot projects. If you need a conduit to the industry, that's why we're here. Come to us, let us know what's needed, and if you want to raise your hand and say we have an idea, we're happy to take that back to our companies and discuss that. There's all sorts of opportunities for AV technology. It's just not going to be about what's in your personal vehicle. So it's really understanding the use case, where you want to use the technology, deploy the technology. That goes a long way to setting up pilot projects and demonstrations. And finally, I'll just leave you with this. Safety is, of course, the #1 priority for our members when it comes to AV technology. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a global competition when it comes to setting the standards for automation, electrification, artificial intelligence. The United States, China, and the EU are all in competition to set the standards for this technology as we move into the future. And we think that the U.S. should keep its leadership advantage, not only in the auto industry, but for all advanced technology. And so that's something we really encourage policymakers to keep in mind, that the more barriers that are set up to advancing this technology, the more likely it is some other country or some other bloc is going to set the standards, because that is what's going to happen. Somebody is going to set the standards for this technology, and it's a question of who in the future, and we think it should be the United States. So thank you for your time today. Thank you, Director, for having us here today, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming to North Dakota. Appreciate it. There's so much to say about that particular topic. We could have an entire session about it. Next, we're going to talk about public transit for livable communities, and Brian Rinka from Minot is going to be joining us for that. Thanks, Brian.
Good morning. Thanks for allowing me to come and speak this morning to everyone. I thought about this quite a bit when I looked at the theme of the conference this year and how we were talking about infrastructure. And it came to mind that people don't look at public transportation as infrastructure. You look at infrastructure as roads, water and sewer lines, electricity, everything you need to bring those people into those businesses and developments. But public transportation is the same thing. That's what we bring. We're bringing the people into those places. And I think that infrastructure needs to be a part of what we do as well. Our buses, our drivers, everything we do to get those people into these new developments. In Minot, our motto for our transportation system is that we connect people to places. I wanted to take a few minutes today and speak to you about the importance of including the public transit systems when you're planning for your future developments. One of the things we really like to look at is what we call first mile, last mile. Our buses get people to and from places, but we still have to get the people to our buses and from our buses to the businesses and places they're trying to go. One of the examples I like to use is a number of years ago, there was a development put together in Minot. This is quite some time ago. Large big box store, some other smaller businesses, banks, things along that lines. And when that was put in, they did all the traffic studies, they improved all the roads, they improved the sidewalks along the streets. They put everything together to make this a safe, efficient development. But they never looked at public transportation. They never looked at how we were going to get people from that street that was developed into that business. There were no sidewalks. There was no place for pedestrians, bicyclists, anybody to get from the business to the street to get on a public transit bus. That created some issues. I do think it's important that we look at public transit a little earlier on in our development processes so we can take care of those issues right away. We do the best we can after the fact, but it would be so much more efficient, so much more cost effective to start to use transit at the beginnings of some of your developments. Even places that do not have transit access, that takes even longer. You know, we have a new development going into Minot, our big Trinity Hospital move. There's going to be a lot of other developments going on around there. It's approximately 14 blocks from our closest bus route. That means we're going to have to add bus routes to get to that system. Well, that could take years. You know, from the time you try to procure a new bus, go through the procurement process, get all the funding put in place, get it ordered, get it received, that could be 1.5 to 2 years. Then you need to look at hiring and putting new drivers and new staff on to help with that. So if you wait till these developments are made, you could be 1 year, 2 years down the road before you could actually add public transit access to some of these new developments. In addition to that, there's a number of low and moderate income housing projects going on in our communities. Those are places that definitely need to have public transit to them. A lot of people will be benefiting from these projects, may be transit dependent, or even if they're not transit dependent, they could benefit from having access to public transit. Bringing transit to the table in the early stages of these developments would ensure that access to public transit services are there on the first day that somebody moves into that building. As our communities grow and thrive, our transit systems need to grow along with them. Even in our smaller communities that may not have fixed route transit systems, but use a demand response, origin to destination type of service, public transit needs still need to be considered when you're putting these developments together. Do you have a proper place to safely disembark and load passengers that's away from the mainstream of the traffic so that the passengers are safe going in and out of the business? Do you have a proper place to unload a wheelchair if need be? These are all things that need to be looked at when you're putting these developments together, even in smaller places. You know, we provide, pre-pandemic, public transportation in the state of North Dakota provided about 2.5 million rides per year. We did lose quite a bit of that over the pandemic timeframe, but it's coming back. I think last year, the last reporting year, we were at about 1.9. So the losses are starting to be less over the pandemic. But that's a lot of people that depend on our systems. And I guess the main takeaway I'd like everybody to get today from my portion of this is that the earlier on you can include transit into your development processes, the better off we all are. Think about it like this. You put a development up and you start building the building, you break ground, you start doing the work, and then after the fact you think, oh, I've got to connect water to the street, or I've got to connect my sewer lines or get electricity to the building. That's all done previous to the first shovel being broke ground on that project. And I believe that transit should be placed in that same category of infrastructure. It needs to be looked at prior to that so we can get in efficiently and safely to provide those trips to our passengers to these new developments. So, thank you.
Well, I almost tripped. Okay, so two quick things. One, I just wanted to talk about the partnership that Josh was referring to earlier, and then I want to connect it to Minot. The partnership on AV is really about a partnership between car builders and DOTs and policymakers around the country. And so these three entities really need to come together, very much like what we do with transit programs here in North Dakota. Our transit programs are partnerships. They're deeply seated structural financial partnerships with our public transit providers throughout our state. And we really value it greatly here in North Dakota. And like the governor talked about and others had earlier today, partnerships are the key to so much of this. And we have an incredible partnership on electric vehicles with Capital Electric. And so I want to invite Josh up to talk a little bit more about that along with Steve Solway. So Josh, come on up.
Okay, first off, I just want to say thanks for having us have a chance to present here to the group. Thanks everybody for coming today. So like Director Pano said, we've been kind of keeping our eye on the electric vehicle market for a number of years now. We've held a number of EV promotional events in Bismarck. We've taken part in some here in Fargo as well, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So, does this clicker work here? I'll try the red one here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so EVs, big question that we're looking at is, are they really going to be our future here? And if you've seen this vehicle before, this is the Tesla Cybertruck. It's certainly unique, maybe a little bit terrifying, but something we're looking at. So, but what really is going to drive this is a market change, and what is a market change? It's going to be based on supply and demand. So what's going to change the demand? Consumer preferences, economics, incentives, and then our supply questions are manufacturer policy-based, product costs, and product availability. So if you've been in an EV, driven an EV, these are kind of the performance positives you're going to see. There's maximum torque available at 0 RPMs, electric motors capable of going 0 to 20,000 RPMs, reducing or eliminating the need for any gears, no engine idle, results in no need to disengage the motor from the drivetrain. All this leads to a consumer experience that's quiet, powerful, comfortable, and convenient. Negatives: vehicle range will vary with temperature, just like a gas or diesel vehicle does. In our experience, we will actually exceed the EPA range on normal, warm, non-hot days. Speed does obviously play a big part. Range will begin to drop below EPA estimates when temperatures drop below 32 degrees. And below 0, range may be reduced by as much as 40%. That's what our experience in testing has shown. So on the economics, these are the lowest cost of per mile transportation option. EVs are 300% more efficient than an internal combustion engine, where you're losing so much of it to heat and noise. Cars, like the Chevy Bolt, Tesla vehicles, and some of the mid-size SUVs, can get around 3 to 4 miles per kilowatt hour. And the trucks that are coming out now, Rivian has a truck that's being delivered now, the Tesla Cybertruck that we saw at the beginning here, and then next year the Ford F-150 Lightning, they should be averaging about 1.5 to 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So running the numbers out, US average is 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can drive 24 to 32 miles for about $1. Driving an average of 10,000 miles a year, you could save over $1,000 comparing to $2.50 gasoline. And you're going to reduce your maintenance costs dramatically. No more oil changes, no more transmission flush. Regenerative braking pretty much eliminates the need to replace brake pads. And direct drive motors, about 1/3 of the moving parts of these vehicles. So another economic benefit here, 80% of your charging would likely be done overnight at home. Even with a level 1 charger, which is just a 120 volt outlet, most commuters can charge overnight to cover their daily commute, which is a 40-mile national average. EVs can be programmed when to charge, so even if you don't have a control program through your utility, you can program the vehicle to charge during cheaper rate time periods. And a lot of utilities are developing off-peak charging, so it's a more effective way to use clean energy and extends the life of the grid, makes your existing equipment more reliable. So now on supply. These are the manufacturer policy plans. Ford has announced they intend to have 40 electrified models by 2025. Lincoln line will be only electric. GM ending sale of gas and diesel vehicles by 2035. 23 EV models by 2023. Nissan planning for 12 new EV models by 2022. And VW plans to produce 50 all-electric models by 2025, and they plan to sell 2 to 3 million per year. And Fiat announces plan to be all-electric by 2030. And GM's Cadillac line is going all-electric as well. Are they putting their money where their mouth is? So $300 billion, the 10-year automaker planned investment in EVs. So that's more than 75% of the nation's gross domestic product. $91 billion is Volkswagen's investment just by 2026. $85 billion from Daimler Chrysler for transformation to electrification on their models. $22 billion Ford is committed toward EVs just by 2025. Tesla's continued yearly investment of $10 billion into investment in batteries and manufacturing. GM, $27 billion toward electrification by 2025, and $300 million of that is to a new Detroit EV plant. And so on the supply, this is your major component here and the major cost driver of an electric vehicle, battery cost, lithium-ion batteries. And you can see here what they've done over the past 10 years. We're talking an 87% drop in the cost, and the current price is about $137 per kilowatt hour. If they get to $100 per kilowatt hour, that's going to be pretty much the breaking point where an EV model compared to a similar model and gas engine, the EV model will be cheaper to manufacture. So, talking about EV sales here now, did those supply changes and policy changes start to change the market? We've seen a 3,500% increase in EV sales from 2011 to 2021. This is plug-in hybrids, and then the green ones are the battery electric. And this is a predicted growth going to 2030. So upwards of 25 million, and this is just in the US here, 25 million electric vehicles on the highway by 2030. So with all that, charging infrastructure is going to be dramatically needed. You can see the North American slice there in the middle, expected to need about between 9 and 11 million charging stations. And out of that charging stations, this is the expected percentages. So obviously close to 80% of those will be home level 2 charging, which is just a 240 volt circuit with like an outlet like a welder or what you'd have for an electric range, roughly the same power consumption as a water heater or a dryer. And 1% possibly DC fast charging, so that's your supercharging stations. Up to 350 kW is kind of the industry max right now, but you're able to charge a 100 kilowatt hour Tesla, which can go maybe around 325 miles on that battery. You're able to charge that vehicle fully in around 25 minutes. And then level 2 stations for public charging, which would be, take like a hotel site, a park area, a visitor center, something like that, where you can get roughly 25 miles per hour of charge. And then 13% for workplace charging. But again, getting close to 9.6 million, this is one estimate, and others have them up to 11 million charging stations needed by 2030. So that utilities like us, public utilities and other cooperatives have to kind of get a plan together on what these charging stations are going to need for capacity, trying to work with the owners on charging rates. Those are things we are dealing with in our strategic planning. So in our experience, this past summer we set 3 new system peaks, which is the highest amount of stress or power that we produced and sent out on our grid. They were all set 3 new ones this summer due to the continued growth of our area and the extreme heat that this summer had. But on our peak day, the variance between that night prior to that peak and that daytime peak, which occurred around 5:30, there was 60 megawatts of variable capacity in there. So at the bottom here, if you took that 60 megawatts and you divide it by 7.2 kW, which is roughly the most common home charging station for an EV, you'd be able to charge about 8,300 EVs that night on our peak day even. And like I said earlier, your average commuter driving 40 miles a day, they're not going to charge every day. So if you're charging once a week, there's a lot of variability in there. We would not likely ever see this many vehicles charging in our network. We have around 20,000 accounts, so that'd be almost a third of all of our accounts charging at one time. And out of that 60 megawatt variance, 40 megawatts was available for a full 12-hour window, which would be able to charge close to any EV out there right now, fully charged from a dead battery in that 12-hour period. So that brings us back to our first question. Is our transportation system going to be electric in the future? And again, thanks for your time.
Good morning. I'm Steve Salwai with the North Dakota DOT, and I'm happy to be here with you this morning. And like Josh mentioned, 80% of the charging is going to be taking place at home. However, we still have to plan for the remaining 20% that's going to happen out on the road to kind of relieve the range anxiety that goes along with a lot of the electric vehicle owners. So the North Dakota DOT, we're primarily a federally funded agency, and since we accept the federal dollars, everything we do, we have to continue to have the strings that are attached with the federal dollars. So if we want to sign a corridor as an electric vehicle corridor, as corridor ready, we have to abide by the federal laws. And right now, the federal rules require that you must have DC fast charge in place, spaced no farther than 50 miles apart, cannot be more than 5 miles off of the main traveled roadway, and you must have the J1772 combo plugs. And we cannot include the Tesla charging stations because those are proprietary. They do not allow regular vehicles to charge at their stations, so therefore you have to have the combination plugs. However, Tesla can charge at the generic charging stations because Tesla actually provides their owners with a conversion adapter for them. So a couple years ago, Legislative Council asked the department to do. Oh, sorry about that. Didn't realize my presentation wasn't up there. A couple years ago, a Legislative Council asked the department to do a study on electric vehicles. And they asked us to do primarily 3 things: design a jointly owned public and private network, make recommendations regarding EV infrastructure, and review the cost and benefits for various options and the future economic impacts. And that study made a few recommendations. One of them was that if possible, the charging stations should be privately owned and publicly available, similar to a gas station that's out there today. Century code should be reviewed so that we don't inhibit the installation and operation of electric vehicle charging stations. We should adopt the most recent federal spacing requirements, which is currently at 50 miles for the interstate system. And we should adopt a 75-mile spacing or the most current federal spacing requirements for the remainder of the system, whichever is greater. And the reason we kind of did that is, as you get into rural North Dakota, we didn't know that it was going to be possible to have electric charging infrastructure every 50 miles. And so that we, with the new technology, like Josh mentioned, some Teslas are going over 300 miles on a charge. We felt a 75-mile was probably an adequate spacing. Well, I guess my map didn't show up. I think I messed everything up. You gotta love technology when it works. Anyway, I was gonna have a map up here which showed the location of charging infrastructure across the state. And right now, we don't even get close to meeting the 50-mile spacing requirements. So, as I mentioned earlier, in order to sign a corridor, you must have level 3 DC fast chargers no more than 50 miles apart. Right now, the only locations that we could probably sign is between Fargo and Grand Forks. Those are the only locations that we would actually meet that 50-mile spacing requirements. So when we look back at the study that the department did a couple of years ago and made recommendations on, we divided the system into 3 priority levels. The interstate was the first priority, the national highway system was the second priority, and then the remainder of the state highway system was the third priority. So in order to sign the interstate system, we would need to install approximately 17 charging stations across the state, spaced, like I said, a maximum of 50 miles apart. And if we include the national highway system, we would need another 16 across the state. There we go. That's the map showing where the current locations are. If you could move to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. This actually shows where the locations would be for the interstate system if we were spaced at a 50-mile spacing. Now, we're not tied to these locations. This is just kind of a minimum standard that if we put them in place, where those locations would be located. If you go to the next slide for me. This slide actually shows if we would include the interstate and the national highway system, we could actually have coverage based on what this map looks like. And about a month or so ago, the department applied for a federal grant to install federal charging infrastructure. If we are successful with that grant, we should be able to have coverage across the state just as the map shows today. So we're hoping that we're successful with that grant and that we should be able to start putting some charging infrastructure in the next, hopefully within the next year. So I'm happy to be with you this morning. I know don't have a lot of time. So with that, I'll just close, and I'll be around all afternoon. If you have any questions, feel free to find me and we can chat. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna have a slight change in plans here. You can hear probably that they've been done for about 10 minutes. Some of their food is located right there. So we are between people and food, which is not a good place to be right now. We went a little bit over this morning with some of the conversations. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make an audible, if you will. Justin has graciously agreed to answer any of your questions after the presentation. And then I've agreed to help him get the word out on a bunch of the active transportation stuff. I should also let you know that the governor's announced an increase in the Department of Transportation's budget around Main Street and active transportation. And so we're actually putting another $5 million, $4 million and change dollars into the program, and that includes active transportation, design standards for active transportation and increasing those and paying for those. And also, you'll appreciate this, heaters and heated bus facilities as well in a variety of different towns across our state. So we're gonna continue to do that. So Justin has agreed to allow me to continue. And now, Kate says that she can do her presentation in 120 seconds. If somebody can time her, that would be awesome. She says she's gonna fly by her eyebrows. I don't know what that exactly means, but we're gonna see, and then we're gonna let you guys go to lunch. Okay, here we go.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. I said your eyebrows are gonna fly off because we're gonna go so fast. I'm the next presentation, if you guys can pull that one up. I'm Kate Herzog. I'm with the Downtowners Association in Bismarck. Pretty fast, right? I can talk fast. I'm here to talk about micromobility. I just want to talk about the Bismarck case study of e-scooters. We got e-scooters this year. It's been great. Let's see if I can advance us. Okay, micromobility, right? We heard about it, first mile, last mile. Bismarck got bird scooters this spring. If you've never been on an e-scooter, you basically download an app, it unlocks the scooter, you take it for a ride, they charge you, you lock it back up. Our police department was cool with it, our engineering department was cool with it, our planning department was great with it, and we were great with it. We wanted to see how it would work, but a whole bunch of people, if you look on Facebook, will say, oh my God, great. You're gonna throw them in the river, people are going to, run over cats or something. We really did not see that. And so really what we wanted to say was just say yes to some of this emerging transportation technology, right? If you listen to Facebook, just don't listen to Facebook, actually. The other thing, Bird scooters, they heat map everything. So you can see where the scooters are being picked up, where they're going. So we reached out to them and said, hey, where are the scooters going? Where are people riding these things? And so a lot of them are actually taking them to downtown instead of taking them out of the downtown, which was nice for us because we see those people as customers. We had great, high utilization. We had a fleet of 100, only 80 scooters out at a time. It was probably less than that. 5 rides per day per scooter, 3,000 total rides within the first month, which was April 2021. And as I mentioned, we did some heat mapping. So yeah, don't borrow trouble. Don't read Facebook. Don't listen to Facebook. Say yes to e-scooters, and you'll be happy. Thank you.
Awesome. You did awesome. Okay, I got a couple of things. Vision Zero Water. So our Vision Zero program is very, very important. All across the state, it saves lives all of the time. We're gonna lose over 100 North Dakotans and others this year in North Dakota alone. 38,000 this year in the United States. It'll probably peak 40 because of what's happening post-pandemic. The largest we've ever seen in the last decade. So Vision Zero is important to save lives all of the time. And I had one more thing I wanted to mention that, again, I took care of Justin. I think I took care of everything. I got everything. You know what, thank you so much. Oh, I know, it was electric vehicles. We're gonna have more electric vehicle charging stations over the next 10 years than we've ever had in our entire existence as a state. And we're gonna start putting federal and state money. We're after grants, more grants to get them installed so that we can support electric vehicles. By the way, my last vehicle, gas vehicle that I'm gonna buy is probably the next one. And that's it. There won't be any, it'll be all electric after that. So I'm expecting to move to an electric vehicle as soon as possible. Maybe even this next one will be an electric vehicle as well, so I don't have to bother with changing out. And car companies, he was not kidding. Having been from the car business, these investments are the largest investments that they've ever made in their history, and they are all converting to electric vehicles. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and when is within the next 5 years, 10 years, we're all gonna see electric vehicles, and we're gonna need to make the mental conversion in our head. Last thing is again, I wanna talk about active transportation. Transportation just isn't surface transportation, it's all transportation. It's walking, it's biking, it's scooters, it's transportation choice. Transportation, we call it on demand. And we're going to be developing tools not only for communities, but for the state to give citizens, businesses the choice in how they move their goods around the state, a better choice, a more localized choice, an individual choice, even a choice on your app that tells you how to best get there the quickest. It may not be a car. It may be to walk in some cases, or it may be to bike. So with that, I'm going to close this out. And is there any, I'll do this. Is there any question that has to be asked right now? Not that I'm disincentivizing you from asking questions. No, good. We're all done. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists.